The Mindfulness Bible by Patrizia Collard. Chapter 2, The Awakening Mind, The Science of Mindfulness. Third part of Chapter 2, The Connection Between Mind and Body. One of the first psychologists to study the connection between physical and psychological processes in the human mind and body was Edmund Jacobson, who researched the topic in 1920s at Harvard University. What he found was most significant, that mental arousal also leads to an increase in tension of muscles, which Jacobson could measure with an EMG, a device that he invented for this purpose. He found that in mental emotional arousal, especially when fear is present, the muscles contract. He developed muscular relaxation, first tensing and then relaxing muscles on the out breath, which led to a decrease of activation of the sympathetic nervous system arousal, which was responsible for the physical signs of stress in the body. He could now prove what ancient cultures had known for decades and what Aristotle, for example, had written about it in De Anima, that there is a highly significant connection, psychosomatic, between body and mind. Although we can think of those two systems as being independent, they are actually two sides of the same coin and cannot be separated. If one part, say the body, is agitated, then the other part, the mind, will follow. We are not stressed or agitated by occurrences themselves, but by whatever special significance we give them. For one person, a dog might be their best friend, might be connected with memories of happy childhood, and this might evoke feelings of joy, even love. For another person, this same dog might trigger different thoughts and feelings such as fear and distress. This state of anxiety influences the way our bodies respond. In order to achieve a different physiological state, it makes sense to put the mind into a different mode. And this is exactly what mindfulness does. A relaxed mind will help the body to follow suit, and mindfulness can serve as a highly efficient relaxation technique, providing not only a pleasant effect but also contributing essentially to mental and physical health and well being. So, how does the brain respond to intense stress? In reaction to a situation that you believe you cannot handle, part of the brain called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, also called HPA system, is activated. This system triggers the production and release of the primary stress hormone cortisol, which is very important in organizing systems throughout the body, including the heart, lungs, circulation, metabolism, immune systems, and skin, to deal quickly with a life threatening situation. However, cortisol also feeds back into the hypothalamus and hippocampus in the brain. When those areas are hyperactivated over a long term, because your job is too demanding, for example, or your relationship is toxic, they become exhausted and thus less functional. The HPA system also releases chemical messengers such as dopamine or adrenaline, which activate the amygdala. And if the amygdala is hyperactivated, you may feel anxious all the time and eventually burn out. While high levels of adrenaline float through your system, they suppress activity in areas at the front of the brain concerned with short term memory, concentration, inhibition, and rational thought. They also interfere with the ability to handle difficult social or intellectual tasks and behaviors during that time. Have you noticed that stressed individuals are rarely empathetic, creative, or kind? At the same time, the hippocampus is storing the emotionally loaded experience as long term memory. Effects of stress on the brain and body. Having discussed briefly how the brain works and how stress can affect us, it's time to look at the havoc that ongoing stress chemicals can cause in the brain and body. Below is a brief description. Number one, we have two nervous systems, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic state is the one we ideally want to be in as often as possible. It is the state in which we feel relaxed, at peace, in equilibrium. We only switch to sympathetic nervous system when we feel threatened. So this latter stage is switched on for survival and thus needs to be swift and effective. Our forefathers survived attacks by wild predators because of this highly effective system. Number 3. Nowadays, however, this system gets switched on many times each day and often remains switched on. If, for example, a particular project at work makes you feel out of your depth a lot of time. Long term sympathetic nervous system activation causes damage to almost all regions of the body and mind, causing chronic stress through hyperactivation of the SNS, the sympathetic nervous system. Number 4, the hyperactivation can create a number of physical abnormalities such as autoimmune dysfunctions, thyroid problems, chronic fatigue, frequent infections of the respiratory tract, the skin, and the digestive tract, to mention but a few. Number 5, we are also aware that this hyperarousals lead to psychological diseases such as depression, suicidal thoughts, and burnout, to point out just the tip of the iceberg. In primitive times, this brain action would have been essential for survival, since long lasting memories of dangerous situations would be critical for avoiding similar threats in the future. So, if you get stuck in a lift once, you will remember this one experience rather than the 2000 times when the lift worked fine. This can lead to avoidant behavior or the phobias. The stress response also affects the heart, lungs, and the blood circulation. Breathing becomes rapid, and the lungs take in more oxygen. The spleen discharges red and white blood cells, allowing the blood to transport more oxygen throughout the body. Blood flow may actually increase by 300 to 400%, strengthening the muscles, lungs, and brain for added demands. You can now run faster or hit harder. The immune system changes when stress chemicals flow through the body. The system now focuses more on areas that could get wounded in a fight. The immune boosting troops are sent to the body's front lines where injury or infection is most likely to occur, such as the skin and the lymph nodes. Other areas, however, are left unprotected. So, long term stress can be responsible for respiratory and other infections. Stress also shuts down digestive activity, a non essential body function during short term periods of hard physical work or crisis. This can lead to gastrointestinal problems, frequent urination, and even diarrhea. In a sense, you survive dangerous situations because of this very effective stress response. That's good, isn't it? If, however, the SNS is switched on more or less non stop because of the crowded trains or roads, high demands, little time off, and so on, you will experience sickness. The most commonly reported ailments are fatigue, lack of energy and motivation, sleep disorders, appetite disruption, depletion, depression, immunodeficiency, frequent illness or infections, thyroid, endocrine burnout, obesity or diabetes, autoimmune disorders such as chronic fatigue, cirrhosis, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, chemical sensitivity, high blood pressure, infertility, and so on, to name but a few. The stress hormone cortisol is a toxic substance if it is in our system long term. It impairs brain regions, suppresses secondary immunity, overactivates the amygdala, causing fear or negativity, and the adrenals, causing burnout or weight gain. These decrease the growth of new brain cells, making us to stick to old fearful thinking, causes atrophy of hippocampus, which can produce 30,000 new cells daily, but not if too high levels of cortisols are present, and impairs hippocampal memory. No new cell growth means no ability to form new associations, neural pathways, or new ways of thinking. And impairment of cingulate cortex, the linking memory and emotion, and of the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function or the decision making, means that new projects don't get done or lack the creative spark. Chronic stress therefore strengthens negative networks and weakens positive ones. Mindfulness as a stimulant to changes in the brain. All this fantastic information has only been available to us for just over a decade, and fMRI scanners can now see the working brain and show us how stress or meditation affects this vital organ. The more we practice mindfulness, the stronger and wider the new path to more freedom of choice and less stress will become. A stressed brain cannot learn to retain new information. It will purely fight for its own survival and will lack mindful compassion towards others. Without necessarily being aware of it, we tend to perform in the same way when we are presented with a situation similar to one in which the neuronal pathway was initially developed. This is why we often behave in the same way when we are in stressful, frightening, or emotional situations. On the other hand, we can see a way out of this sometimes vicious circle by remembering this principle. The more we practice a certain behavior or a way of thinking, the easier it will be for us in the future to stick to it. So, the more we practice mindfulness, the stronger and the wider the new path to more freedom of choice and less stress will become. So, if the brain is in the correct relaxed state, new neuronal pathways can be created that can transform our thinking and our actions. An analogy is to think of our brain as a lawn. To stimulate certain cells into a particular action can be seen as similar to walking over a lawn. When we walk over a lawn, our feet bend and tread down the grass and leave a small path. And in the brain, our cells form new connections between each other, which in turn also form a kind of path. The more often we walk along this new path, the more frequently we perform this action or task, the wider and more permanent the path on the lawn will become, and the more connections between neurons will be established. Eventually, this will lead to new ways of thinking and behaving. Old neuronal pathways will eventually get overgrown and less used. They cannot be deleted, but they can become redundant. As can be shown by various studies that have taken place in last 20 years, mindfulness can lead to measurable changes in the brain. Not only do certain areas grow, but the patterns of activity responsible for depression or obsessive compulsive behavior change. Mindfulness and emotional outcomes. Mindfulness is also an important factor in retaining a healthy self esteem. Research shows that low self esteem levels are connected to a number of psychological illnesses and diseases, such as depression and anxiety disorders. A recent study in one of the universities in Germany has shown that there is a significant correlation between mindfulness and our level of self esteem, as well as its stability. These findings also support the importance of mindfulness for the overall quality of physical and mental well being. Ongoing practice of mindfulness meditation can reduce the size of the amygdala, which in turn leads to a reduced stress response. Mindfulness based approaches and the impact they can have on our well being, as well as on the outcome of the mental health problems, have been scientifically tested on a broad scale. One project involved nearly 2,000 participants in just one meta analysis. Comparing five meta analyses from the recent years, it can be concluded that mindfulness based approaches are sufficiently beneficial for general physiological health and stress management for people to include them in their daily life routine, as well as for those who suffer from mental health issues. Since 2008, scientists from New York University have been examining the brains of meditating Buddhist monks using fMRI scanners, which show where most activity is taking place. The researchers suggest that the human brain is organized into two different networks, each active and responsible for dealing with different tasks, such as pouring a cup of tea, which is an extrinsic network, or dealing with emotions, which is an intrinsic default network. It seems that the monks, when in a state of deep meditation, found a profound harmony between themselves and their surroundings, being able to keep both extrinsic and intrinsic networks active at the same time. Researchers believe that this ability may lead to feeling of harmony that people who meditate may experience. The 68-year-old French monk Mathieu Ricard, who turned to Buddhism some 40 years ago, has been labeled by the popular media as possibly the happiest man alive. He had been attending retreats in Nepal throughout his student years, and after finishing his PhD in molecular biology at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, decided to live in Nepal and become a monk. He is the Dalai Lama's French translator and has been extremely keen to observe scientific proof for meditation and well being. He has been known to spend 2 hours or more in a scanner performing several meditations while his brain is observed and analyzed. Scientists at the University of Wisconsin have shown that Card's brain produces high levels of gamma waves when practicing unlimited compassion meditation towards all beings. Perhaps even more surprising is the massive activity in his left prefrontal cortex compared to the right prefrontal cortex. Furthermore, his amygdala, which processes fear, has shrunk from the size of an almond to the size of a raisin. This all suggests that he has an overwhelmingly large capacity for happiness and joy, and is less likely to tend towards negativity. Although research like this is still only in its infancy, remarkable results have been found in long term practitioners, as well as in practitioners who did just 20 minutes of meditation a day during a 3-week period. It can be concluded that meditation that focuses on compassion generates affection, empathy, and the desire to help, and thus changes the way the brain functions in an enduring way. Once upon a time, humans were described as purely selfish and wanting to rule others. But today, scientists are discovering that humans also possess a deep rooted ability to be good and kind. Meditation that focuses on compassion generates affection, empathy, and the desire to help, and thus changes the way the brain functions in an enduring way. A study from Wisconsin University discovered that mothers who were viewing a photo of their little ones not only felt more compassionate, but their fMRI also showed that regions connected to a general positive mood lit up. Another study measured brain reactivity when subjects were asked to help others. Again, the pleasure centers showed activation. This and many other studies prove that compassion is an inherent human reaction that is deeply rooted in our brains. However, our body also responds to others' vulnerability. Whether we give or receive compassion, we feel relaxed, happy, and full of energy. Next video coming up, chapter 3 about mindful therapies.